It's about history. It's about preservation. It's about sense of place here on Eastern Long Island. With Esperanza Leon, I'm Irwin Levy, and this is Our Hamptons. Esperanza.
Hello, Irwin.
Good morning. Needless to say, our special guest today, Esperanza, is right in your wheelhouse, right?
Oh, I'm so excited. Yes.
Now, we're going to bring up, why even build this up anymore? I think we should just bring in Mr. Geoff Gehman, author of a tremendous book, The Kingdom of the Kid, all about his time growing up in Esperanza's adopted hometown. Now Esperanza's in East Hampton, but she's living in Wainscott now, and that's where Geoff is really what he spoke about in The Kingdom of the Kid and what he's going to talk to us about today. So Geoff, a big Our Hamptons podcast, welcome to you.
Thank you. Good to have you be with you again, Irwin and Esperanza. It's a privilege and a gas to be with you in Our Hamptons.
I love it. A gas.
Thank you. Now, look, we've known about the book. Esperanza, of course, being a Wainscott resident is even more familiar with it than I am. But we had the fortune a few weeks ago, which was really the impetus for this, where Esperanza's one of her other many hats, involvement with the Wainscott Heritage Project, had Geoff speak to a gathering at the Wainscott Chapel. And me being the guy from Queens in this, I used my forward skills and said, "Hey, Geoff, how about being on the podcast with Esperanza and I?" So, Geoff.
Yes, Irwin was quite taken with your conversational presentation, I think. And anyway, it was fascinating.
It was fascinating, and yes. I think it's really.
Irwin, I think you're the only spectator of mine to ever show up in a bicyclist outfit. So I was taken by that.
Geoff and I are in a similar age neighborhood, Esperanza. So I can say this, hey, Geoff, at our age, if we don't use it, we lose it. So we got to keep using it, right?
Motion is lotion.
Motion is lotion. I like that, Esperanza. So Geoff, I'd really like to just really dive in with this. I know, and I learned this from the presentation that you gave us, that you were really here. It was really a 5-year window that you and your family were really here, like from the late 60s on. Are we correct in that?
That's correct. 1967 was when my parents built their New England, Long Island colonial house on Whitney Lane in Wainscott, $21,000, including land. Pretty cool. Wow. And we, were there until 72, and it was a magical time. Shall I tell you about how magical it was?
Please. We can't wait. And I know our listeners. Yeah. Because if you haven't read the book, Kingdom of the Kid, you're going to get it straight from the author's mouth.
and again, to Our Hamptons podcast audience, we're starting here in 1967.
Right. Back then, Wainscott and the entire South Fork was customized for kids and parents who wanted to be kids. In Wainscott alone, on any given day, I could crab in Georgia Pond. I camped by the ocean side in the Georgia Association in a grove of shad trees with branches as twisted as witches' fingers. I still love to hear the ocean. Whenever I hear the wind, I hear the ocean, and it's because of that experience. Also in the association, where else could you play tennis by a windmill that had been moved not once, not twice, but 3 times?
Right.
It was quite a character, as we learned to serve in volley. I played baseball down by Hollow Road near the intersection of Hollow and Main Street on a rectangular diamond. I dare anybody to find a baseball field that's rectangular. And it was there where I met my very first best friend, Michael Raffle, an avid Yankees fan to my avid Red Sox fan. We still are friends after all these years. But you know, the ball field was by a cemetery, a one-room schoolhouse, a potato field overlooking Wainscott Pond and the ocean. And even as a 9-year-old, 11-year-old kid, you get a sense that this is a very special place. It's a junction of very special places. And I would go up the road, ride my Schwinn bike to the one-room post office, and Mrs. Pearson, the postmistress, had a great collection of seashells. And I always used to look at the most wanted FBI posters and think, wow, maybe I'll discover one of those guys, in sunglasses walking on Beach Lane Beach.
Geoff, I have to ask you a question here.
You first.
Okay, Esperanza and I literally have swords out. We're ready to because we can't wait to jump in. I apologize, Esperanza. Please go ahead.
No, it's fine. Go, please.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Chivalry isn't dead.
Gentlemen first.
Chivalry isn't dead. I had a question, and I know you mentioned this on many an occasion about, when we saw you speak at the chapel, how you did spend a lot of time in the Georgia Association, which now there's a lovely gentleman who stands guard at the entrance off of Wainscott Main Street. Was it like that back then also, or were you just able to coast in there anytime without getting the third degree?
The only reason why I was sort of like a resident alien of the Georgia Association, which is also among members nicknamed the Settlement, is that my father was singing buddies with a fellow named Bill Noble. And Bill Noble was a great-grandson of Walter Edwards, who was a co-founder of the association. Edwards.
Sorry, Edwards, was he the one of Kilcare?
You got it.
Edwards? Yes.
The wonderful mansion they built right on the dunes, Kilcare, looks like a ship moored, in a dock, has been the subject of De Beers' Diamond Ad and the cover of a James Patterson novel. You see it everywhere. So Bill Noble and his wife Joyce and their kids had a house, a former barn. It looks like a whale to me with a tower and all that. And Bill, his membership, his roots allowed us to be associate members. So to answer your question, Irwin, back then, so much more relaxed. If there was a guard, I don't remember a guard. And we basically came and went the way we wanted to. It was very relaxed. The way, the whole South Fork, especially Wainscott, was. It wasn't tear down city, and it wasn't, build an automatic 10-foot high privet hedge back then. We were middle-class people mixing with much wealthier people who welcomed us, probably because they liked the nobles so much.
Yeah, well, I was thinking, as you're saying too, about the rectangular baseball field and describing all these places that were part of your childhood, and thinking, and it was something that you left us with during your talk as well, that truly it's what's rather miraculous and marvelous is that these things actually are still there, not the baseball field necessarily, but the one-room schoolhouse and the potato field and the cemetery. And so it's sort of the essence of Wainscott remains. And when we're living here, we lose sight of what has continued because we're become so obsessed with what's being lost. It's refreshing to really look at this place through your eyes, through the 5 years that you were here and your recollections, and then your return in subsequent years, that you feel as if, well, there's so much that remains, and there's a hopefulness to that for me that I appreciate.
It's true. I can walk or drive along Main Street under that great canopy of trees, and I get the emotions riding my bike to the one-room post office and all around really come back. It's very easy. All I need basically is to look over Wainscott Pond, which I know it's polluted quite a bit, but from a near distance, it's so beautiful. And I love the fact that it, is a berm away from one of the best beaches and the ocean, one of the best beaches around. So I got to thank, groups like the Wainscott Citizens Advisory Group. the Wainscott Heritage Project, and even the Wainscott Tree Society.
And the Sewing Society.
And even probably best of
the
all,
best
Sewing
of all.
Society, which has been around forever,
yeah.
you know, which is headquartered in the chapel, does so many good deeds for kids and on up. So, you know, it is preserved. I get around the East End quite a bit during my 2 times a year out there. So I get to see how other places have changed. And I think Wainscott has changed the least. And thank God for it. I still kick myself, pinch myself to think that, you know, thanks to my dad, my social bulldozer, upward climbing dad, you know, who grew up the son of a Mennonite minister, and never knew about the South Fork as a kid in Eastern Pennsylvania. You know, he just settled us in Wainscott. You know? Thank God for Larry Gehman.
And it's interesting where life leads, right?
You better believe it.
And Geoff, you were,
by the way, let me go on a couple other memories as a kid. My habits, you know, picking strawberries on the Osborne farm, which is sort of like nostalgic now because in Wainscott, you can't pick your own. Although the Babinski farm, you know, serves us some of the best, largest strawberries around. One of my favorite memories, Irwin and Esperanza, is going around the corner off of Main Street, turning onto Town Line Road, going over Daniels Lane. And just on the left-hand side, I watched this crazy house being built in the summer of 1969. From the road, all you saw was this salt box slashing, you know, diving roof and a big stone facade and you know, a door about 7 feet high and this long stone and wood fence. And it looked like, you know, a farmhouse fortress, but as I like to say, it looked like, you know, masons were from outer space were building it. Made me an architecture nut, and I still love every time I'm out there, I stop and look at it. But once again, you know, strawberries, best beach, tennis court by a windmill, a basketball hoop in the Westwoods where we lived that was rigged with the only streetlight in Wainscott because my friend Mike Raffles' father, Joe, was a lineman for Lilco. All these things in one, you know, at one junction over 5 to 6 years. That's why I had to write the book, and that's why I love talking to people like you.
Now, Geoff, when you were in Wainscott for this 5-year period, you were there as a year rounder. Are we correct? I mean, this was,
you know, no, we summered from 67 to basically 71. In 71, my parents, Larry and Pat, were having marital troubles. We had a house in New Rochelle. We were a 2-time family, and they felt that it would just be a good idea, since I loved Wainscott so much, for my family, my mom, Pat, my sister, Meg, and me, to settle in our house in Wainscott full-time for the first time while we rented our house in New Rochelle. It was a big experiment that was aimed at, I think, saving their marriage.
Right. And that was towards the end of your time frame in Wainscott, right?
Yep.
That was like, okay, so
72 was the end.
Okay, so you were whatever, 13, 14, whatever it might have been at that time.
Right. It was a great year, by the way, 71, 72. I went to East Hampton Middle School, made the honor roll for the first time, played basketball, football, and baseball, got to hang out with my friend Mike Raffle full time. You know, went to the beach as often as I could, and I really got to see all the seasons. We all know all the seasons out there are great, but there's nothing like the fall.
Yeah.
Don't tell anybody.
Yeah.
No,
yeah, like the back roads, Esperanza, I think that's ship has sailed.
I only tell fellow special people.
Now they're big mosquitoes. They come out only in September.
Exactly.
Oh my goodness. Yes, right. And they're people, right?
That's very funny. That's very funny. But Geoff, you know, as a teenager, I mean, again, those are, and we spoke about this informally when at the Wainscott Sewing Center when you did your presentation, how, you know, the memories one has as a 12-year-old, a 13-year-old are so powerful as compared to when we get older, when our memories are not necessarily as strong as they were. But it's really when you're 12, everything is so magnified and
it is, right? And crystal clear, right?
Yeah.
It's like you have less clutter in your brain.
That's exactly right.
Right. It's true. And that was the aim of writing the book, to establish that template. But now here's the rub, my friends. In 1972, my mom, my sister, and I were out in California at my dad's brother's house sitting. And my mom got a call from a Wainscott friend who was a real estate agent. And her friend Helen told us that my dad had sold our house on Whitney Lane without my mom's permission. He was in financial straits. He was a manic depressive, had a very bad streak of mental illness back then. So that was the end of our Whitney Lane Wainscott life. My parents got divorced. My dad married a woman who had a house on Beach Lane in Wainscott. So I got to still come back. But my Wainscott drifted away, and those memories, while strong, kind of gave way to my normal life of being a journalist and living in Pennsylvania and all that. So 1991, my dad is living in Hampton Bays. He's divorced for a second time. He has a stroke. I go out there and I move him back to Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, where I live. And for 10 years, I did not come back to the East End. And it felt weird. I mean, I tried to find the East End in other places like the Berkshires in Massachusetts and the Jersey Shore, especially Long Beach Island, and the west coast of Ireland, where my grandmother grew up and where my mom, found paradise during World War II. So as I failed to discover the East End, South Fork, Wainscott, in those places, I got the feeling I have to, as a writer, I have to go back and relive this time. So in 2001, I had a query in the New York Times Book Review come out, 11 emails the next day, and I was off and running. So what I like to say is that, with your memories, they're strong. Sometimes they're suppressed or repressed. So what I learned to do was something called emotional archaeology. As I talked to my friends, as I did archival research in the East Hampton Star at the East Hampton Library, as I walked the beach and I went through the Georgic Association and I looked at that crazy house on Town Line Road, the memories came back. It's so strange that I forgot that house on Town Line Road. I forgot how important it was to me until I looked at a book of houses, modern houses on the East End, and I opened up a full page with that house in 1969 when there was no fence and no privet hedge. And it hit me like a lightning bolt. And that was a key thing for me wanting to write about that house and for me to write that memoir. So that's a very long answer to your question.
That's a really interesting thing that you like that house, which is for our listeners, that's a house designed by Norman Jaffe for a filmmaker,
Harold Becker, who directed films like City Hall and Sea of Love.
Right. And so it's so interesting. I didn't realize that was really what kind of triggered you to return. And I also wondered, why did you stay away for 10 years and look for Wainscott in other places?
It was a combination of things. Number one, the first 3 years of my dad living in Pennsylvania was really painful. It took a long time to find a place where he could be comfortable. So I was busy. I think the most prominent reason is that it was painful, the ghosts.
Right. So it really was an intentional staying away of you couldn't bring yourself to come back.
Semi-intentional.
Right. Yes.
I think I was looking for reasons to stay away. I
have to interject one thing here, Geoff, for 1 second. Esperanza. I'm sitting here listening to that, and it really, what I was listening to was Geoff's trying to find Wainscott in other places.
I know. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Geoff, we want to get back to this because this is really, Esperanza, this is a theme that we've touched on so often on Our Hamptons podcast, how the intangible factor of this place, because really the places Geoff has mentioned, the Berkshires,
all beautiful, the Irish, all special in some way, right?
Exactly. And people talk about the Cape and other kind of locations, yet this place, not only in attracting and this is again, Esperanza, boy, have we discussed this, the most creative minds of our generation seem to gravitate here, whether it's in architecture, in horticulture, in music,
Right.
in
Yeah.
art.
Yeah.
You know, what is it? And now here we have, this is Geoff, a writer, who's really documented his own experiences. What is it about the special sauce of this place that
that keeps people, yeah, that is like a magnet, a magnetic force, right?
It is. So,
Yeah.
Geoff, I mean, now again, hey, Geoff, this is off the outline. I told you we go things or we do things
Sure, no
organically here.
problem. Well, hey, look, first of all, it's the place itself, the geography, the fact that, people who don't know the South Fork Wainscott don't know how woodsy it is. The West Woods, where I grew up, off of Sayers Path, is still very woodsy, and it was a great place to find yourself or disappear. And the fact that, where we lived is a mile away from, once again, one of the best beaches around that unfortunately has had erosion and, has been given over to saving endangered birds and all that. But once again, people don't realize that you go to the beach out there and it's still very unfrequented. Mainly some people have their pools. The other thing that makes it magical for me is really the people. And I needed to write about the characters, the people in the book. And the Raffle family, Mike Raffle family, they live one street away from the Gehmans. And I used to go over there. It was sort of like a open door B&B all the time. I learned to eat kielbasa. I love kielbasa there because Joe Raffle is of Polish heritage. Mike and I, listened to rock and roll records in his basement. That's how I learned to love Mata Hoople. I'd mentioned the basketball that we played right out on the street, way into the night. Mike's sister Karen is a good friend of mine, still lives in East Hampton, recently retired as a special ed teacher in the East Hampton School District. Yeah. She loves Wainscott more than me. She's an authentic Wainscottier. I love that word. And I love to point out that Karen, the Raffles began life in Southampton. They're looking for a house, Wainscott perhaps in the late 60s. And once Karen saw the pick your own strawberry patch at the Osborne farm, she made her parents build a house in Wainscott. And the ardor, the passion that Karen has still infects me. And even though she lives in East Hampton, she still loves to come back to Beach Lane Beach, our favorite beach of all time.
Yeah.
So
and interesting, Geoff, that Karen is a gardener. So that she loves the environment, gardening. She's been involved with so many different endeavors in that regard. So interesting to know that she was the impetus for her family being in Wainscott because of that strawberry patch, because of the agriculture, really.
You got it. And of course, where else? I know there are other places where you're going to find potato patches, potato farms by the sea, but not as many, not as many. The way, God, there's the habit that where they cut the gut between the Atlantic and Georgia Pond twice a year. It's a magical, they let the sea creatures come out and in, they refresh the pond. It's just, and the inlet that's created is magical to me. And once again, you're going to have to work really hard to find a place like that. And the very fact that, what's that creature that's returned to New York State in Georgia Pond? Flamingo.
Flamingo. I was just going to mention it. Yes.
that's a very good sign. Very good sign.
Yeah.
So now, on terms of, 'cause we do want to touch on your book, The Kingdom of the Kid. We really want to make our audience aware of this book. This book is not a new book. I think you wrote it about 10 years ago or so, but
2013, published by SUNY Press and very available on Amazon.com.
There you go. There's the Geoff Gehman plug, and well deserved. He earns it.
Yeah, it really is worth it. It's a great book.
Yeah, it really is. Esperanza, and you brought this out in the beginning, how this conversation is sort of like the book coming to life in a sense, because these are really, the stories that Geoff is relaying here is what he really does relay in the book. And it's really like inside dirt, no pun intended, of
I
what
like the dirt
Wainscott is about, right, Geoff?
Yeah. Well, the book, Wainscott, I begin the book by recalling the 90 or so minute bike ride I did every day in the summer to the one-room post office. But Wainscott is sort of like the anchor, the headquarters for me to write about the old Bridgehampton race circuit, where drivers like Mario Andretti and Mark Donohue raced on hairpin turns around dunes, and fantastic place. That's where I was there the day that Mario Andretti met Paul Newman.
Oh, yeah. And we've
cool.
done, what's amazing is we've done an episode on the track, right? And
Yep.
and that's why the book is so great, because it's not just about Wainscott,
right.
and it's not just about, my personal memories. It really has such a, I don't know, I think it has a much broader range of and reach that anyone can identify with, because again, like, this place has attracted so many characters, the cast of characters, as we like to say.
If you're interested in drive-in movies, I write about the Hamptons Drive-In, where I fell asleep to 2001, and where my mom discovered a Jones for a pot brownie in the Peter Sellers comedy I Love You, I'll Be Tokeless. If you're into vintage cars, nothing better than Aussie Clark South Long Island Automotive Museum. My favorite car there, as I mentioned to you guys before, 1933 silver Pierce Arrow with so stylish, but bullet holes in the trunk. And the whole bullet holes were there because it was owned by Al Capone.
Wow.
Yeah.
I got all my passions out there in 5 or 6 years for sex and writing and nature and baseball. And, where else I found my baseball hero in Kari Stremski, Boston Red Sox Hall of Famer, grew up in Bridgehampton. And right down the road, and a mile or two away on Daniels Lane, lived Truman Capote, who is my very first favorite writer because of his wonderful short story, A Christmas Story. Once again, these characters are all long gone because of attrition, the nature of things, whatever. Although, Carvel across from the drive-in, across from Bridgehampton Commons, is still there.
Still there.
Yeah, but they don't have the cones on the building anymore.
We miss those large rotating ice cream cones.
For sure.
But you're right, Esperanza. That's you, Irwin, and I were all joined in this mission to establish the Hamptons as something much more than a stupidly wealthy playground.
Oh yeah,
it is so complex. And I love I love writing columns for the East Hampton Star that explore places I need to explore. It's unknowable because it's so geographically, naturally complex. Because hey, so many people hide behind their privet hedges. You don't know who they are. There are so many different types of people. There's an overlooked middle class you're going to find, in many parts of Sag Harbor, for example, and in Montauk too. So the book and what we're doing today is just to establish how rich it is, how varied it is, how worth it is exploring.
No,
right. And just to reiterate your point, rich in history, rich in character, rich in just beauty, natural beauty, not the other rich.
Yeah,
right.
Truthfully, Esperanza, the term we really sense of place. It has, we touched on earlier how it's always attracted, some of the most creative minds of our generation, but the sense of place, the pull that it seems to have, Esperanza used the term earlier, like a magnet, the pull that this place has with all of the changes that we see. And we're going to get into that because we're going to start to wrap up soon, Geoff, and we want to get your take on what it's like for you coming back. But the pull of this place, the stories you reflected on with us just now that we're so grateful for. Esperanza, when we had the episode, which was 10 years or so, 20 years or so prior to the time that Geoff is talking about when we spoke on the episode of Elizabeth Barlow Rogers and what Wainscott meant to her, which was more in the 50s.
Well, no, actually, I mean, it's really rather the same time period in so many ways. She was, here until the until more recently to the 2000s, but
arrived earlier.
I would say that really it's that magic moment of which we always talk about, Irwin, of the 60s, 70s,
right,
maybe early 80s, and then the subsequent years, it just really starts turning into something else, even if retaining some of that early flavor.
Did Elizabeth talk about going to the Wainscott General Store?
Absolutely. She has this. She wrote this wonderful book with the editor. And he died recently. Okay, I will think of it. But
Jason Epstein.
Thank you, Jason Epstein. And they wrote a history of East Hampton. It's about the town of East Hampton, but the chapter on Wainscott, of course, and I'm sure she researched it because that's where her love lay. Is fascinating if you ever want to explore that. And she maps it all out.
Well, you mentioned
in the 70s.
That link to the 50s and even earlier. And I talked about this emotional archaeology quest of mine. I read there's a chapter in Kingdom of the Kid about the Wainscott General Store, which was closed during our time there, but there was something, this cedar shingled kind of garage store, looked like a big piece of driftwood with this great rusty Coca-Cola sign. And, I like to write about things I don't know about. So I went back and I interviewed all sorts of folks who were there in the 30s and 40s when the general store was a hub. It was the headquarters of the community. If you wanted a boat caulk or gasoline or penny candy, you went there. And Chauncey Osborne, the proprietor, was a big old cuss who, kind of lazy. He would cut bacon and ice cream with the same rusty knife.
Yum.
Right. But the deal is...
And one point I would make, and I know we're sort of nearing the end of our time, but one point I would make is how you're talking about this congregation or a point of congregation for so many people from so many different walks of life, which is part of that beauty that you touched on in the beginning of this place that has brought together people from so many different backgrounds, so many different financial possibilities, and very seamlessly. I mean, I'm sure, I'm not saying there was no classism or anything like that, but I just really do think that that's the place where I grew up, and I feel like that's the place that as well.
Right. Well, we're going to get into, you want me to get into the changes. And,
like when you come back, because we do need to start wrapping up, Geoff, but when you come back, that's like the question I have. And I mean, obviously you still have the love of the place, as we do. Look, Esperanza's been here I've been here 35 years. Esperanza's been here longer than that. We're not blind. We see the changes, but the pull is still there. What do you feel when you return here?
When I was a kid, you could bike down Main Street in Wainscott without an SUV on your tail. So it's unfortunately because of the traffic on the Montauk Highway, Main Street has become a big safety valve. So sometimes it takes
bypass,
5 minutes for me to turn right on a Hollow Road onto Main Street because of all the traffic. That's a big change. It doesn't bother me so much because, like you, I know a lot of the back roads. The teardowns are problematic. Luckily in Wainscott, in the Westwoods where I grew up, not as bad. I'm very lucky, we're very lucky that the house my parents built in 67 is pretty much the same house. And the owners, Tanya and Richard Nevins, have had it since 98 and they love it like we did. And when I was out there a couple of weeks ago, I had a high tea on the lawn that the Gehmans seeded back in 67. And, that was the first time I had a meal there since 1972. That's the people, the draw. The changes also, the big change I would say is the lack of relaxation. Back in the late 60s, early 70s, earlier, even the wealthy people came to the East End, Wainscott, Georgic Association, and they let their hair down. They wore their bathing suits all the day long. They did not feel the need to, helicopter in 50-foot trees. They didn't have the need to erect new berms, once again, to keep the riffraff out, the prying eyes. They didn't feel the need to build cookie cutter homes that really look like country clubs instead of homes. People, newcomers, relative newbies, we used to call them the Coney Islanders back then, by the way. They don't relax. They want the perfect estate. They don't want a house. They don't want a sanctuary. What they want, an estate.
Yeah.
And I feel that, it's so prevalent, I sort of ignore it. But if you ask me the big change, the one that I get most pissed about, it would be that.
Yeah.
Jeff, and the thing that got me is that my parents relaxed out during that time because they knew their kids were safe and happy. They became happy. They kept their marriage going. And I know other parents were the same way. I hope that parents today feel the same way, but I doubt that they are as relaxed as my parents were.
I can attest to that. That it's not the same.
Esperanza, that's such a theme that that Geoff was just bringing up about the relaxation, about everything else. And again, it's amazing, Esperanza, to me, how the mission of Our Hamptons podcast continues hearing things like this. What Geoff was just describing were things we spoke about during the episode about SANS, the African-American communities in Sag Harbor. The episode we did about Leisure-Rammer in Montauk. The podcast we did about Beach Hampton.
Yep. Life was outdoors. Right. Life was in nature. It was relaxing. It was
scraped your knee, whatever door you were nearest.
We're not talking about fundraisers and having an event to go to every night.
Exactly. So, our podcast audience, if these are the kind of stories you like Esperanza likes, like Irwin likes, and obviously like Geoff likes, the Kingdom of the Kid, really.
And I have to mention the subtitle, The Kingdom of the Kid, growing up in the long lost Hamptons.
Yes.
Perfect. Yeah. That's as good a place to close as any, Esperanza.
May I offer one more?
Nope. Last one, Geoff.
Last one, I promise. You've asked me why I continue to come back, and I mentioned it's the people. And this is one of my favorite stories because of the book. The book, led to this happening. 2016, I attended the 40th reunion of the East Hampton High School class of 1976, which I did not graduate from. And the reason I attended that reunion is that my friends in 8th grade at the East Hampton Middle School remembered me so well. And they really remembered me better after reading The Kingdom of the Kid. They invited me to come back and share their reunion.
Nice.
Yep. It's about the people.
You got it.
It's about the place.
Exactly. Geoff, thank you so much for being our guest on Our Hamptons podcast.
You're very welcome.
Really
it was a gas. It was a gas and a privilege.
Fascinating stories.
Yeah.
Esperanza?
Irwin,
always a pleasure.
As always. Yes. Thank you.
Until next time. Thanks so much for joining us. New episodes of Our Hamptons are released every other Tuesday. Find them wherever you get your podcasts.